our job is always to balance the risks of the product and the benefits for the company and for the user. So if you don't understand the benefits, of course, everything would be a high risk.
Hi, I'm your host, Magali Pellissier, and I'm a product manager. Welcome to Product Perspectives, the podcast for product people that gives a voice to their stakeholders. Each week, I show you the other side of a product. I interview the people who contribute to making products a success. They are engineers, writers, marketers, support analysts, UX designers, or even salespeople. Not only will I give them the credit they deserve, but we will uncover what makes a good product and a good product manager from their perspective. Stakeholder management is a key skill for product managers. So just as you are obsessed with listening to your customers, let's hear from your stakeholders. My guest today is Gabriela Porto. Gabi is a Brazilian lawyer based in Amsterdam, and she specializes in healthcare and life science. She is currently the head of compliance at Flow Health, a women's health app, which helps people from all over the world navigate through their periods and pregnancy journeys. Before that, Gabi worked for another digital health startup as a compliance manager when she was introduced to and fell in love with the tech world. In this episode, you'll hear an enhanced format with additional commentaries and call to action for both product managers and stakeholders. Enjoy! Thank you very much, Gabi, for joining me today. I'm very excited.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
It's the first time we have a lawyer in this podcast, and I'm very excited. I've got so many questions. So let's get started a bit on your background. Did you want to be a lawyer when you were a kid? How did you end up in this role?
I actually wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a kid, but I think I was a very good student and I had very good grades. And in high school, I thought, well, maybe law school could be a challenge as well. So other courses, they were not an option for me. So yeah, I think I landed in law school, and it was a good choice after all. I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that was about to be my question. Are you happy right now with that choice you've made, or do you still want to do archaeology on the side then?
No, I don't think so. Of course, I would be very happy to be doing some work in Egypt or in Rome, but I think it's a very nice field, and you have very nice opportunities in the market as well for lawyers in general and legal counsels.
Great. You say there are lots of opportunities in law, and for us from the outside, we just know, oh, this is legal topics, but we don't really know the different areas. So can you tell me more about the different types of lawyers in the tech companies? Because you work in regulatory compliance. What are the other roles?
So that depends a lot on the type of the company and also the size of the company. But I can give you an example of how my current company is structured. In a nutshell, we are 15 or 16 lawyers in total. So it's a good group. And mainly the areas that we deal with apart from regulatory compliance, which is the team that I had. Privacy is something very, very important nowadays, and in tech as well, in healthcare especially. Corporate matters, intellectual property, something very interesting as well. And of course, the one that everybody knows about, contracts, drafting, reviewing contracts, and so on. So I think at Flow, these are the main areas that we cover right now. But the field is huge, so you have lawyers doing all sort of things.
Okay, and where do you sit in the hierarchy? Do the people who work on the product side, on the legal product side, report to the product management organization, or are you sitting on your own organization?
Even though, for example, my team, the regulatory compliance team, we work very closely with product managers and other departments in the organization, such as marketing, brand, customer support, everyone. We sit under the chief legal officer. So we have our chief legal officer who oversees this whole department of 15 people. And we also have a chief product officer who oversees all the product managers and so on. So it's quite well structured.
Regulatory compliance, what does that mean exactly? Can you tell me more about what your role looks like on a daily basis?
This is actually a very difficult question because compliance could mean many things depending on the industry you work. In healthcare, for example, and at Flow, the company I work for currently, regulatory compliance function consists mainly of healthcare compliance, marketing, advertising compliance, some commercial issues like competition, pricing. Then we also have a bit of our artificial intelligence compliance, which is a very interesting topic. And mainly on a daily basis, if I have to summarize what we do, we work with other departments to make sure their product, their projects are risk-free. Sometimes it's impossible to release a risk-free product, but we make sure that preventable risks are addressed during the development phase to avoid releasing something that we could have done better from a legal standpoint. So mainly we review also a lot of content, which is very interesting. We work together with user acquisition, the content creators, brand to review every press release or piece of articles that we release in the app. So it's a pretty interesting and dynamic job, actually.
Great. So there's a lot there. Around the content first, which is the last item you mentioned. Can you give me an example of a piece of work where, as a lawyer, you have made changes to the content before it got published?
So because we work in, we are a wellness app, we have to be very careful with what we say. So we don't want to put users at risk, for example, by saying that for sure they have a disease X, or if they do X, Y will happen at the end. We always have to be mindful with the way we talk to them to make sure that they go to their doctors and they follow up on everything. That make sure that all the information that we use to build these articles come from a good source, from good articles, good literature. So we work with these content creators to align on that. And on top of that, there are some interesting topics that sometimes we touch, and they're very controversial from a legal standpoint. Alternative medicine, for instance, it's not always legal in every country that we operate as a company, or abortion, or certain medications. So we need to be careful with what we say in these articles, not to mislead users and put them at risk.
You've just mentioned that the law may differ depending on the country. So how do you manage that when you're in a global company? Are you specialized in all those different regulations depending on the country, or do you get some external help? How do you know all of these different regulations?
So that depends on resources. Honestly, at this point, my team is very focused on European and the US market. So we are experts in regulatory compliance from a European Union and a US perspective. When we have troubles in other countries, we always seek external legal advice. For one main obvious reason, language. Sometimes we don't speak the language, so it's even possible for us to do some sort of research internally. And of course, it's always better to rely on someone that knows very well the local law. And when we don't have resources to do any of that, we just avoid talking about it.
Okay, so this is about content. Are there instances where you want to avoid putting a feature out there in the product because you're not quite sure? Have you got examples of interventions that you've made on feature work?
So in short, some features are riskier than others. So of course, we take the risk level of the feature into consideration when we decide, for example, not to release. We always try to avoid this advice not to release. We always try to seek some alternatives that we can work on together and make sure that we release the end product. But I guess one of interesting work that we did was with our chatbots. We have a chatbot functionality inside of the app, and a project is started as a legal requirement. So we trigger some changes to the feature following some legal requirements, so compliance with US laws, actually. We started a working group with the product manager, with marketing, with the medical advisors, and then we worked together to transform these legal requirements into actually valuable features to the user. So something that is started as just, oh my God, these legal people again telling us how to manage our product. And actually we thought, you know what, some of these legal principles like transparency, risk management, we can actually use in our favor and deliver something that is better than what we actually had before.
Okay, this is very interesting because you've got two sides of the story. The side that I know, which is oh my God, we have to run this past legal and they're going to say no. They're going to come back with so many questions and so many change requests to the way the feature works. And this is where, as product managers, we tend to see legal as a step we don't really want to do. And then there's the other side where you say, actually, the legal team can help almost foster innovation and help us make better products. So let's touch on the first part. What do you think it is that creates this situation in which product managers get frustrated because they have to go through this legal process?
I think that sometimes it's a lot on the lawyer's side of things. I think I'm going to take the blame on this one. Sometimes lawyers act like they live in a bubble. They are completely detached from the product development side and the overall company strategy and the company goal. So they believe that they are just to tell you what's wrong and then you deal with it. And this is such a wrong approach, especially if you are an in-house counsel, which means you work in the company with these people. So we were actually partners rather than advisors only. And I think to these legal counsels, my biggest advice is be curious, get yourself involved in the product manager's work, understand their point of view as well, because I think that our job is always to balance the risks of the product and the benefits for the company and for the user. So if you don't understand the benefits, of course, everything would be a high risk. So this is not ideal. So always sit with the product manager. And then on the other side, we always ask the product managers to, if you're planning to do something, if you have good ideas, sit with us from the beginning because we can help you shape your idea and say, you know, this could be actually illegal or non-compliant. But if we do this way, what do you think? You think we could keep the value of the feature / product and we still be compliant? So I think it's a two-way street, completely right. Sometimes people really have this idea that lawyers are there just to block a project and innovation. And this happens a lot, honestly. So I don't blame you at all for thinking this way.
Right. I hope some lawyers are listening to this podcast and you'd have share the message across. I will definitely help share this with product managers.
It only takes one complaint from a user or one complaint from your competitor, for example, to make this regulatory body look at your company and start screening everything that you do.
What I understand from what you're saying is really we need to bring the legal team closer to the development cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say that when you leave the product team behind, and you know that you have to go through them anyway. So you have two options, right? Either involve them from the beginning or you show them your prototype when everything is done. And the problem is, well, maybe there would be no problem and then you would release as you expected, or maybe there would be a problem and then we have two solutions here, right? Either go back to the beginning and change, for example, the design of the product. So we spend this whole time, sometimes 3 sprints building something to go back to do all over again, or we release the way it is and then assume the risks that the product might bring. And nobody like to think in the worst case scenario, right? I think people think the lawyers are very negative and we think that the product managers are too positive. So they never think about the worst case scenario. So sometimes they want to release because they don't think, well, what about the consequences? Can we discuss the consequences? So none of the scenarios is ideal. So the best way is indeed include the legal team as part of your stakeholders mapping, together with UX research, UX writers, marketing, everyone that is involved in your development process again.
Okay, that's very interesting because you almost paint product managers as risk takers. I think it's a bit the culture somehow because we want to release an MVP. So we want to release a quick thing that works to test out how users react. But you're right that we may not think about the consequences of this because we just want to get feedback and we're thinking, oh, surely it can't go wrong.
Yeah. That's so true. Like, it can't hurt, right? It's just an MVP. So, yes, it can.
Is there a piece of education to do here? Because every single year, my company sends me several training courses about GDPR, about security, like IT procedures and all of this. I don't think we've got any training content for product managers telling them, okay, what are the consequences if you release a product that is not compliant and the impact on our reputation from a financial perspective, we don't really have that, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think every company, especially when you start, right, they send you this bunch of trainings, sometimes recorded videos and slides to read, and people are so sick of it. And I think the amount of content that you actually internalize after these trainings is very small. What we like to do is two things. One, I'm a big fan of live trainings. So I know that when you work in a global company or because of COVID, for instance, it's really hard to be in person, meeting people face to face. But even Zoom calls in which you present some interesting cases, so concrete examples of things or other companies that did something that we are doing and it definitely didn't go well for them. So we often show them, this is what we're doing. These people did that and this is what happened. And people, I guess, they absorb more concrete examples. You can ask questions. So they're supposed to be interactive. So you can sit together with for example, your compliance manager or your compliance counsel, and they would be explaining things to you, sharing you some practical cases. And then you can, for example, ask, how does it relate to us? So what are we doing wrong? So we can learn from these practical experiences. But you're completely right. I think training here and open communication in general is one of the key aspects of getting things right.
If you showed me some very famous cases of companies being fined hundreds of millions of dollars for problem in their product, I would probably think, okay, I need to talk to the legal team first.
That's true. I think people like to talk money, right? So then when they see like these big companies being fined like millions of euros or dollars, people get scared. And it's true because we often listen to this speech like, but it's Facebook or it's Google. They're way bigger companies. They're always on the spotlight and so on. But this is not true at all. You have a bunch of examples of medium-sized companies that got in trouble with regulatory bodies for doing things wrong. It only takes one complaint from a user or one complaint from your competitor to make this regulatory body look at your company and start screening everything that you do.
One of the things you've talked about is artificial intelligence compliance. So can you tell me more about what you're interested in when we have an artificial intelligence product?
Of course, the first one is privacy. So we want to make sure privacy compliant is being taken into consideration from the design of AI-based feature, for example. The second one is related to automate decision making. So we want to make sure that this AI is controlled somehow. We have some quality controls in place so we don't put anybody at risk. Or we don't give, and remember that I work in healthcare especially, so we don't give any wrong medical advice based on model that doesn't work well. So we need to work together with the engineers and work together with the product managers to ensure that we have enough quality control in place. For example, to avoid bias, how big is the database that we are using to build these systems? So there are a lot of interesting issues that are very in the spotlight right now in terms of AI.
How do you make sure that you have a good understanding of what's happening exactly in that AI solution before you can make any recommendation?
So in general, lawyers really lack the technical knowledge. That's why when we will work with engineers, we like to schedule a call for stupid questions. But what we do as legal counsels is to make sure we have a good overview of what we have to do from a regulatory perspective. What are the requirements? So to build an AI-based product, you need to have these in place. You need to have this documentation in place. So we have a list of them. And then we work together with engineers or product managers to make sure we understand if, one, we have what is needed, and two, if yes, if they're compliant enough.
I think what you're mentioning is very important because we talk in this podcast about working together with product managers. But here you're saying you also work with engineers directly.
At the end of the development process, if we had anything to say, we were seen as deal breakers.
So you don't have a technical background. What attracted you to the tech industry and how does that compare to previous roles you've had?
I used to work for the government or law firms. I think working in tech, especially in small, medium-sized companies, it's so dynamic. And remember that I said sometimes lawyers really live in their own bubble and in their own island, completely detached from everything else. And when you work in tech, it's so nice to work together with other departments. You learn so much. I think before I worked in tech, I had no idea about what agile was, what a product manager did.
Yeah, and you're right. There's so much to learn on both sides. And we need people like you who are curious and willing to work together and learn to make some progress in tech. So your company develops an app to help women. What is particular about that industry?
I think healthcare is very interesting because mainly it's very risky, right? You're dealing with people's health and well-being. So you need to have a strong compliance culture in the company. Side by side, we have a strong compliance team and a strong medical team. We both looking into medical credibility and safety. There are many regulations around it, like banking, for example, that is also very regulated. But compare maybe to other industries like gaming, for instance, healthcare is very challenging to work from both legal and product, because even if you're not interested in legal issues, you need to know.
Exactly. And I was about to ask you about other industries. You've mentioned a few of them, finance, gaming. I just want to say to all the product managers listening, if your industry hasn't been mentioned, that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to your legal team.
Exactly. This is not an exhaustive list. This is a sentence that lawyers love.
Exactly. Put the disclaimer.
Exactly.
I'm a big fan of the disclaimer before the roadmap. I don't know if you're the one doing this, but every time we show up a roadmap as a product manager, we have a disclaimer paragraph saying, this is a roadmap, this is a plan reflecting what we're thinking of doing in the future. Please don't make any decision based on this roadmap.
Based on this, yeah. That's very interesting. In fact, it's funny that you touched on this because disclaimers are our big challenge. Sometimes content teams or product teams want to do something or say something or claim things that, of course, from a conversion point of view, it's very useful, but we need a huge disclaimer. And then they're like, how am I going to put this disclaimer on my product? It takes half of my screen. There's always a way to put the disclaimer, be compliant, and still look good.
Right. But don't do like ads on TV, you know, where the small text appears so fast that you can't even read it. It's not accessible because it's such a small print. Don't do that.
No, yeah, don't do that at all. It's actually not even compliant because people should be able to see the disclaimer. Otherwise, there's no purpose, right?
I think on this one, the UX designer would be on your side anyway, because they wouldn't like something that is not accessible. So.
Yeah, and I love to work with them. They have such great ideas. And actually, there are two teams that I'm a big fan of. So UX designers and UX researchers. We work very closely with UX researchers as well, test some hypotheses. And sometimes we say, for example, we try to push for a disclaimer or more transparency on how things work. So make sure that the user knows how to navigate the feature. And then the UX researcher goes there and tests it with real users. And they're like, the disclaimer is quite nice because now I understand what you mean and so on. So sometimes it actually proves our point that some legal requirements can actually resonate well with the end user.
I'm not going to be upset that you didn't mention that you're a fan of the PM team, but that may be why. We've got a question from Thomas, who is based in the Netherlands, where you are usually based, and work as a consultant. He's been at Amazon and Nike before, and he has a question for you.
Hey, this is Thomas. I've been working in product for about 10 years, and we often run into issues with the legal department. So tell me, what is the best way to work better with lawyers in a company and to have a smoother communication and stakeholder management process? Cheers.
That's a 1 million euros question, right? I think sometimes the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that the relationship's not working. if we understand our limitations, sometimes our knowledge limitations, and you know what, sometimes the limitation is basically, I've never talked to you before. I don't know what you do. I don't know in which part of the product you're working on, and vice versa. So I think the best way to work together is to have regular meetings. And I know that might sound cliche or too simple, but for me, it's as simple as that. Have regular meetings with the PM you work with, like meet bi-weekly, for example, to discuss current projects. Give the PM the opportunity to show you what she or he is working on, what they're planning to do, and all of that. And it's also a good opportunity for you as well to bring some awareness over some risks that might be associated with the project. And on top of that, when we talk about product roadmap or quarterly plannings or project vision or anything like that, bring your compliance team into the discussion because they can help you shape the whole project. And I think what nobody likes it is actually surprises. The legal team doesn't like to be told 2 days before release that, hey, I just spent 3 months building this. Can you have a look at this for me? At the same time, the product managers hate when we just come, when everything is done to criticize the work without understanding all the work behind and without understanding what is the product goal in the first place. So I think having this transparency and open communication, I know it sounds cliche, but it helps. One thing as well that we've been working to implement in my current company together with my amazing team is to make sure every product manager knows that they have one person that they can count on. So one of the things that we tried out and we believe it works really well as well is to have one representative. So I'm Gabi, I would be your right-hand man and I'll be working together with you. So if you have any questions, I will be the person that you can come and I will help you out. And maybe if I'm not the person that would actually do the work for you, maybe because I'm not an IP expert, for example, I would work with the console, with the IP console myself to make sure your problem is solved in a nice way. So I think you build as well some trust between us because you can count on me to have your back and I can count on you to include me in your plans. And I think lawyers really want that, to be included.
You've mentioned when we discussed a business partnering project. Can you tell me more about what this is about?
Yes, so this is a project that my team and I are very proud of. And I think the whole legal department at this point. About a year ago, we started to acknowledge that the relationship between our team and other teams were not doing very well, mostly because things that were being developed and planned without our involvement. And then when we were finally getting involved at the end of the development process, of course, if we had anything to say, we were seen as deal breakers. So look at these legal people again coming here to block our release or postpone our release date. So this was not ideal for anybody because we were not adding any value to the product and we were feeling a bit hurt because people were seeing us deal breakers and we don't want to feel this way. So we decided to do something about it. And the first thing that we did was to design what we call a business partnership project because we wanted to be seen as business partners, as partners. So we are not just advisors. We are partners working on the same project from different points of view, but working on the same product. So then the first thing that we did, and I really advise all the legal consults to do the same, is to meet your lead product managers, whoever is making decisions in your company, to understand how these teams are structured, in which part of the product they work, to meet them, to get to know the work, to define processes together. And once we start to understand how things work, we decided so now I see what you want from us, where you need our help. Can we establish some processes to work well together? So for example, if I have to review all the content that you prepare, how would like to do that? We use Jira a lot. Even as a legal department, we use Jira. So how can we make sure that this review process is smooth and it works well for both of us? And we realized, for example, that things were as simple as, you know what, we don't mind sending everything to legal review, but deadline for us is something very important. So just acknowledging this, we started doing reviews way quicker. So the first step of this project was getting to know each other. The second one was to understand our needs. The third one was to, okay, how can we work better together than to meet these needs? And then the fourth part of this project was, well, I'm going to have representative in your team. So we have 15 lawyers in the company. It's hard to have a ratio 1-to-1 in terms of lawyers and product managers anyway. But we decided that some people would be responsible for some teams. So in all product planning, any project management meeting you would have, any requirements mapping. So we got a very nice feedback from product managers that they really appreciate the fact that they now know that they can count on us and they know who they have to reach out to in case they have a problem. So it's about being proactive as a legal counsel and build bridges between the two teams, build trust.
This podcast is also about showing to product managers that it's possible and it's the way to go. So everybody can launch this kind of business partnering project. I think you're quite right about the ratio. As a product manager, I wouldn't expect to have one dedicated legal person just for me, for my products. But the ratio is quite important. You have a decent team, 15 people. That sounds reasonable so that you can allocate enough of your time to one product. In my experience, sometimes is when you have to rely on one person in the legal team, that creates a backlog and it becomes very difficult. So we think we need to think about resourcing for the legal team as well.
Yeah, definitely. What we did as well is that some people have different expertises, right? And depending on the type of the product that you work, sometimes you need more one expertise than the other. For example, I'm specialized in healthcare. If you deal with a very commercial area of your product, maybe I'm not the best person to be with you. So then we assigned a different lawyer with the expertise that you need. But you're right. I think companies in general invest in your legal department.
Thank you. So in this podcast, we also have a section where I make you several propositions and you pick one of them. So the first one is, do you prefer being a lawyer in a legal services firm, government agency, or tech company?
Oh, tech company for sure. I think if I have to do like a scaling of these options, I think the first one would be tech company, second one, work for the government, and third one, law firm.
And in a tech company, do you prefer being in a startup or enterprise?
I love startups. I love it. It's messy. It's crazy, but because we have such a limited resources, you end up doing a bit of everything. So if you are a dynamic person as well, just go for startups because they're just amazing. I love it.
In a startup environment, you said it's messy, there's things going on all the time. How do you prefer we communicate with you? Is it email? Is it Jira? Is it setting up a call?
I think that depends. Normally when I meet a new PM, I ask this question to them. I'm always open. I think email can be very serious, informal. We love to create dedicated Slack channels. So your team together with us. So we have your names, so let's say product perspectives, plus legal. And then we have a Slack channel in which we can exchange ideas or have quick questions. And as I said, I'm a really fan of having regular calls anyway. Set up these calls. And if you don't have anything to discuss, just have a tea together or a coffee.
Good. So if we summarize everything and we have one single takeaway for product managers who are listening, what makes a good PM to work with from your point of view?
I think a good product manager is someone that is able to bring all stakeholders together, bringing everyone on the table, make sure your product requirements include legal requirements because sometimes legal requirements can affect the product design.
Thank you very much for being so open and willing to collaborate better with product managers. I have to say that I feel very happy and willing to collaborate better with the legal team after this discussion. And I hope all the listeners will be inspired too.
Yeah, me too. I'm very, very happy to be here. I think this idea of this podcast is just amazing. So thanks for having me. And if anyone has any legal questions, please just keep in touch.
Okay, so how can people contact you then? Have you got any preferred way for that?
LinkedIn, my name is Gabriela Porto. Feel free to connect and then maybe we can exchange some emails. And if someone lives in Amsterdam, I'm always happy to go for a beer or a coffee as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it has enabled you to understand your stakeholder and inspired you to better work with them to make successful products. If so, please share the link with your friends and colleagues. And if you want to suggest some topics, some guests, if you have questions you'd like me to ask during the interviews, or if you have any feedback, you can write to me at magalipellissier@hotmail.fr.